The train station bustled with voices, footsteps, and metallic announcements, but no one seemed to hear the muffled cries echoing in a corner of the hall. A girl of just 7, hugging her thin coat, wept alone as crowds passed by her, as if she were invisible. People looked away, some quickened their pace, others pretended not to see. Her solitude was a silent cry against the world's indifference. Her eyes searched desperately for a familiar face, but found only concrete walls and indifferent gazes. Her despair grew with each passing second, until fate, cruel and generous at the same time, decided to change the course of that afternoon. It was then that a man approached, not like the others who had swerved, but with firm steps and a determined gaze. His military uniform, partially hidden under a simple coat, revealed that he was no ordinary stranger. He was an American soldier on duty. He stopped in front of the girl, knelt down at her level and asked in a firm, calm voice, "Where's your mother?" The child, sobbing, tried to answer, but her tears drowned out the words. Behind them, the station was still in motion, oblivious to the drama unfolding on the cold ground. No one imagined that this seemingly simple encounter would bring about a turning point capable of shaping not only the girl's life, but also that of the person who decided to stop and see where everyone else had passed. New York's Grand Central Station pulsed like a living organism. Lighted panels flashed arrival and departure times, metallic voices announced distant destinations, and the rush of people echoed hurried footsteps across the worn marble floor. The air smelled of strong coffee from the coffee shops and cold iron from the tracks, mingled with the perfume of hundreds of strangers passing one another without ever making eye contact. Amidst the crowd, a small figure stood out, a 7-year-old girl, her face wet with tears, hugging her light coat as if it were armor against the world. She was lost. Her gaze darted back and forth, searching for a familiar face, a familiar voice, but all she found were hurried bodies, distracted eyes, and concrete walls that made her invisible. People passed her by without noticing, some even glanced for a moment, but quickly looked away as if acknowledging her pain demanded too much responsibility. Her crying mingled with the noise of the station, but who stopped to listen? Her mother had disappeared into the crowd when she got off the train minutes earlier, and her promise to stay close to me was lost in the tumult. The girl tried to follow her, but one push, one stumble, and that was it. The safety line snapped. Now she was there, alone, surrounded by strangers who ignored her, and every second felt like a greater punishment. Tears streamed down her face and her small shoulders trembled. Her despair was so great that she could no longer call out loud for help. She could only sob, her small hands covering part of her face. The station, which seemed routine to others, became a threatening maze for her. The tremor of the arriving trains shook the ground as if the whole world were unstable. The voices on the loudspeaker sounded like thunder, distant and cold. The indifferent crowd was an ocean in which she drowned alone, invisible. And the worst part wasn't the fear of being lost, it was the feeling that no one cared. Until, amidst the indifferent rush, a man stopped. He didn't look away, didn't pretend he hadn't seen. He walked steadily with rhythmic steps, his tall body and erect posture betokening discipline. He wore a plain coat, but beneath it military pants and boots were visible, scarred from use. His face had the hardness of someone who had seen more than his fair share, but his eyes held something rare, attention. He observed the girl for a few seconds, and in that instant, he seemed to see what everyone else ignored. The soldier approached slowly, knelt down at her level and held out his hand. His voice, deep but calm, broke through the chaos of the station. "Hey, little one, what happened? Where's your mother?" The girl raised her teary eyes and tried to speak, but only managed a choked sob. The soldier didn't insist, simply holding out his hand, firm and patient, as if to say, "You are not alone anymore." The mother, somewhere in the station, was still searching desperately, but at that moment, it wasn't she who was at the child's side. It was a man scarred by war, someone who knew the weight of abandonment and loneliness in foreign lands, and who now, unknowingly, had the chance to mend invisible scars. Life, with its quiet irony, had placed side by side the fragility of a lost child and the strength of a soldier who had also felt lost in the midst of battle. And what seemed like just a chance encounter at that noisy station was about to become a bond, capable of changing destinies forever. The soldier remained kneeling before the girl, unhurried, as if he had all the time in the world in a place where every second was contested by the rush of those passing by. His hand remained outstretched, firm but not invasive. His attentive eyes conveyed more reassurance than 1,000 words. The girl looked around as if searching one last time for her lost mother among the anonymous faces, but found only that man standing there, waiting. Then, hesitantly, she reached out her small fingers and touched his hand. It was a tiny gesture, but in that instant, the noise of the station seemed to fade. He smiled slightly, not the wide smile of someone trying to appear friendly, but the restrained smile of someone who knows a gesture like that could mean survival. "It's okay. You're not alone," he said softly, almost a whisper, contrasting with the tumult around them. The girl squeezed his hand, and that simple contact opened a rift between the indifferent world and the bubble of safety that was beginning to form around them. Around them, the crowd remained indifferent. A man in a suit watched them for a second, but then quickly looked away to his cell phone. A hurried woman muttered something about crybabies and continued on her way. A group of young people even stopped to discreetly film the scene, laughing among themselves, as if it were just another spectacle to feed social media. The soldier noticed everything, but didn't mind. He was already all too familiar with the cowardly silence of the majority, the same silence he'd seen on battlefields when a few stood up to defend the defenseless. Kneeling, he asked again, "What's your name?" The girl, sobbing, answered softly, almost inaudibly, as if the name might be drowned out by the chaos of the station. He repeated the name clearly, to show he'd heard, that she existed. "Okay, let's find your mother," he finished, standing firmly, keeping her hand firmly in his. With every step, the child looked around, trying to identify her mother's face among the hundreds passing by. The attentive soldier guided her through the station, as if crossing a minefield. He observed every detail, the color of the dress the girl described, the exit points, the platforms that were beginning to fill up. He thought quickly, but acted slowly, so she wouldn't feel more fear than she already did. The contrast was painful, an entire crowd incapable of stopping before a lone child, and a man who, without any obligation, interrupted his own journey to kneel. Some people began to whisper, as if only now realizing the drama before their eyes. "Could it be her father?" someone ventured. "No, he must be a soldier. Look at his pants." Speculation echoed, but no one offered to help. The collective indifference revealed the coldness of a world where haste has become an excuse for omission. The girl, still trembling, began to speak more. She recounted in broken sentences how she had gotten off the train with her mother, how the crowd had pushed her, how she couldn't follow her. The soldier listened attentively, without interrupting. Every detail was like a clue amidst the chaos. He realized there was real hope. Her mother was probably still at the station, desperately searching. But he also knew that it only took minutes for despair to turn into tragedy, for the girl to be swept away by the wrong hands, for her to become another face lost in the cold statistics. That's when he stopped in the middle of the hallway, lifted the girl onto his lap so he could see her better, and spoke firmly. "Look closely. If you see your mother, point her out." The gesture drew curious glances. Some were surprised by the force of the scene, a soldier carrying a child amid the indifferent rush of hundreds. For the girl, that embrace from above was like finally breathing after drowning. For the first time since she was lost, she felt protected. And as he walked through the station, Nathan, that was the soldier's name, realized something that cut deep. The image of the child in his arms reminded him of a distant one, from when he himself had lost his mother in a crowded market decades before. He had also cried alone, had also been ignored, but back then, no one had stopped. And perhaps that was precisely why he hadn't hesitated now. Nathan walked steadily through the station's main hall, carrying the girl in his arms as if it were his most sacred battle post. She clutched the colorful bracelet on her wrist as her eyes roamed the ocean of faces before her. The soldier maintained his outward calm, but inside he knew that every second was a fine line between reunion and tragedy. He'd seen firsthand what it means to lose someone in a crowded place. The pain of absence multiplies when you realize there were so many eyes and none of them cared. Suddenly, a scream rent the stuffy air of the station. "My daughter! Where is my daughter?" The voice belonged to a woman in tears running among the passengers with disheveled hair and a face etched with despair. Her wrinkled dress and trembling hands betrayed the agony of someone already imagining the worst. She pushed people aside, questioned strangers, and pulled up recent photos on her cell phone showing the smiling girl, but no one gave her answers. The world hurried on, indifferent. The girl heard the scream and looked up in a start. Her eyes filled with fresh tears, but this time with hope. She reached out toward the sound, pointing urgently. Nathan held her tightly and began to advance toward the woman. When her mother saw her in his arms, time seemed to stand still. She fell to her knees in the middle of the station, sobbing in relief, her hands covering her mouth as if she couldn't believe her daughter was still alive, intact, right there in front of her. The soldier knelt down as well, placing the child gently in her mother's arms. The two merged in an embrace that felt like stitching together a gaping wound. Her sobs echoed like discordant music in the cold hall, and for the first time, many of those who had ignored the girl felt ashamed. People who had previously looked away now stared, some weeping silently, others mumbling apologies no one would hear. "Thank you, my God. Thank you. Thank you," the mother repeated, kissing her daughter's wet face. Then, through tears, she looked up at Nathan and stammered, "You saved her life. And mine too. If it weren't for you—" Her voice broke before the end of the sentence. Nathan just shook his head and replied quietly, "I just did what needed to be done. Anyone would have." But the sentence hung in the air because everyone there knew the truth. No one had. An awkward silence fell over the crowd for a few seconds. It was as if the reunion exposed not only the mother's pain, but also the collective inaction of a society accustomed to looking without seeing. Some tried to soften the situation, murmuring, "I'm glad it ended well." But Nathan could see the discomfort on their faces. That scene was more than a reunion. It was a mirror. His mother, still kneeling, held his hand tightly, as if unwilling to let him go. "What's your name?" she asked. He hesitated, looking around as if searching for a way out of the weight of their stares, but answered, "Nathan." She repeated the name, memorizing it as if she were keeping a prayer. When they finally stood up, the entire station watched them. Mother and daughter walked arm in arm, and Nathan walked alongside, not as a hero, but as a witness to a fate that refused to repeat the same pain he himself had known as a child. Deep down, he carried a silent scar. He remembered the day he too had gotten lost, and no hand had been extended to help him. Perhaps that was why, when he saw the girl, he simply couldn't go on. And as the trio disappeared into the crowd, some people stood still, reflecting on what they had seen. The world hadn't stopped because of that lost child, but inside each of them who had watched, something had changed. The station security guards arrived late, as so often happens after a scare. Two of them pushed their way through the onlookers with clear gestures and efficient voices, asking if the girl needed assistance, if anyone was injured, if they wanted to file a report. The mother nodded, but her body was still shaking so much that the next sentence didn't come out. Nathan stood beside her, not in front, and responded calmly, explaining the basics. The confusion on the platform, the pushing and shoving, the line of people that closed in, the child who slipped from her mother's hand like someone slipping from a dream. The older security guard asked them to accompany them to the traffic police office, a glass-enclosed cubicle overlooking the hall, where things are given names and numbers so that life feels manageable again. Inside, the clock started working again. The mother told her daughter's full name, her own, the train they'd taken, the approximate time they'd lost contact. Nathan, nearby, filled in the missing information, detailing the route, describing the mother's dress, the child's bracelet, the color of the backpack, which at that very moment appeared at the door in the hands of a cleaning staff member. He'd found it lying near a bench and returned it with the same modesty of someone making amends for a mistake they didn't make. The girl hugged the backpack as if recovering a part of herself, and the staff member smiled, almost apologizing for not having done more. An agent offered water, another brought 2 cups of hot chocolate from an old vending machine, and the sweet smoke helped break the ice that still bound the mother's hands. Outside, against the glass of the room, a few faces remained glued, silently watching the aftermath of the miracle, as if life needed an epilogue to close a chapter. The station continued its course. Announcements rang, trains arrived and departed, suitcases scraped the floor. A child somewhere cried for another reason. Only inside did time seem to have learned to tread lightly. His mother took a deep breath, and for the first time managed to speak without sobbing. She explained that she had just come from a job interview, that she had arrived in a hurry, that her heart was still beating out of rhythm since her recent divorce, and everything life had silently taken away. "I've become a different person in the last few months," he confessed with a sincerity that didn't ask for absolution, "and for a moment, I almost lost the part of me that was left." Nathan listened to her as if holding a bridge with his hands. He didn't offer any ready-made phrases or recipes. He simply said that sometimes we cross, even without believing we'll reach the other shore, because on the other side, someone needs us. The agent asked for a contact phone number and another trusted person who could pick up her mother if she didn't feel well enough to return alone. She shook her head, embarrassed by the lack of options, and the girl, attentive to every gesture, tightened her grip on Nathan's hand. He pulled a crumpled card from his pocket with his first name and a number. Nothing official, the simple writing of someone who prefers something that fits in their pocket. "If you need help getting back, call me. If anything happens on the way, call me. If you just want to let me know you arrived safely, call me." The mother took the card as if receiving something fragile and valuable at the same time. Outside, a woman who had been filming the scene approached hesitantly. Her cell phone remained in her pocket, and instead of the impulse to record, there was now a silent apology. She brought a child's coat someone had left on a seat. It wasn't the girl's, but the mother gratefully accepted it, saying the night was getting cold early. The woman asked if they could call a taxi through the app and waited in the hallway until she was sure the car was on its way. Small gestures began to emerge in the wake of what, minutes before, had been indifference. Nathan, for his part, noticed the change in his own body. The knot in his stomach that always formed when he rediscovered old scenes began to unravel, thread by thread. The memory of the fair where he had once gotten lost at the girl's age still lingered, but now it was surrounded by other images, the small hand touching his mother falling to her knees and rising again, the glass-enclosed room where life took on a new lease on life. There was something quiet and clear inside him, not pride, never, but a peace that knew its place. When the taxi was announced on the counter radio, they descended the metal stairs together, the steps creaking under the rush that had already taken on a different flavor. The girl, backpack on her back, took 2 steps and returned to hug Nathan's legs, a crooked, sincere hug that shattered any defense. "Thank you for seeing me," she said in a whisper the station would never be able to record. His mother repeated, "Thank you for stopping." He nodded again in that small gesture that had become his signature. He didn't promise anything he couldn't deliver, but he did say, "Come home and text me." He watched the two of them get into the car, the windows fogged with shallow breaths. The driver waved and the vehicle blended into the lights of the city that always followed. Nathan stood for a moment, hands in his pockets, watching his reflection in the glass of the traffic police office. His uniform was still hidden under his ordinary coat, but that hardly mattered. Heroes like stages. He liked arrivals. And without knowing it yet, he had just been pulled into a story bigger than his gesture, because simple gestures are sometimes the beginning of things that truly change people's paths. He returned to the main hall, crossed the sea of people again, and, for the first time since he had set foot there, realized the noise didn't hurt. A boy ran past and nearly knocked him over. His father apologized with a hurried smile, and Nathan responded with one, brief and genuine. Life was resuming its course, but with it a fine-tuning. There was, between departures and arrivals, a silent commitment made under a ceiling of iron and glass, not to let haste drown what courage can save. That same night, back in his simple quarters, Nathan sat on the edge of his bed, the dim light from the lamp illuminating only part of the room. The uniform hanging on the hanger seemed to watch him, reminding him of the formal battles he'd fought, but none seemed as intense as the one a few hours earlier in a crowded train station. His cell phone vibrated on the table, and for a moment he considered ignoring it. He was too tired for anything. But when he opened the screen, he saw the short message, written in shaky letters. "We're home. She's sleeping. Thanks for stopping." Nathan stared at those words as if they were a map, as if each letter opened a window inside him. He took a deep breath and set the device down on the table. The silence in the room wasn't empty. It was filled with the image of the girl hugging her backpack, the mother kneeling in despair, the station that for minutes had become the world's courthouse. He lay down, but sleep didn't come quickly. Instead, memories of his own childhood came back like echoes. He too had gotten lost once in a crowded market, clutching a cheap toy in his hands. He cried, screamed, was pushed by strangers, and no one stopped. He stayed there until his mother found him, desperate, minutes after what felt like hours. The trauma had never faded. Perhaps that was why that afternoon he couldn't move on. As he thought about it, he realized something that surprised him. For the first time in a long time, there was no bitterness in the memory. Instead of anger at the indifference he had suffered, there was a quiet relief. Because now he had done the opposite. Where before everyone had walked straight past, he had stopped. And this gesture, so simple and so definitive, had transformed the story of a child who could carry the same wound as him for the rest of his life. Across the city, in the modest living room where mother and daughter rested, there was also silence. The mother, lying on the sofa, couldn't sleep soundly. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw the scene again. Her daughter, huddled in the corner of the station, the soldier kneeling, his hand outstretched, the crowd motionless. Now, however, this flash didn't fill her with despair, but with gratitude. She picked up her cell phone and looked at Nathan's number saved on the card. She didn't know if she would have the courage to call again, but just having that contact saved was like carrying a talisman against loneliness. The next day, the repercussions at the station itself were still echoing. Employees in the hallways were talking about the soldier who carried the girl in his arms. Security guards said the scene had opened their eyes to the number of lost people no one ever notices, and even the passengers who witnessed it began spreading the story. It wasn't news, it didn't make national headlines, but it was enough to deeply scar everyone who witnessed it. There was a kind of silent shame in those who merely watched without acting, and also a kind of shared lesson. Sometimes what scares most is not cruelty but indifference. Nathan, hearing discreet comments in the cafe near the barracks, simply smiled. He didn't want recognition. He knew, however, that karma moves in mysterious ways, returning repeated scenarios until someone has the courage to write a different ending. For him, that girl was more than a rescue. She was a chance to prevent his story from repeating itself in another small, fragile body. And so, on a seemingly ordinary night, he understood what he might never have admitted aloud. He wasn't just a soldier by duty, he was a soldier by choice. And that season, his war wasn't against armed enemies, but against the coldness that so often kills faster than any bullet. The next morning, when the city still slept, and only the distant sound of sirens cut through the silence, Nathan woke suddenly, sweating, his heart pounding as if he'd just run for miles. It wasn't ordinary insomnia, it was memory. The dream had dragged him back to a place he never wanted to return, the neighborhood fair where, as a boy, he'd lost his mother. He remembered the smells clearly: roasted corn, cheap fried food, fruit piled high on stalls. The noise of vendors announcing specials mingled with music from old radios. Nathan, too small for the chaos, held tightly to a plastic cart he'd bought with the little his mother had saved. For a moment, he turned to watch a group of pigeons fighting over scraps of bread on the ground. When he turned back, his mother's hand was gone. The crowd surged forward like a current. He called out once, then again, but his thin voice was lost in the noise. He tried to walk against the flow, but the adult shoulders pushed him back, and soon he was trapped between unseen bodies. The tears came quickly, streaming down his dust-stained face. He cried, sobbed, raised the toy as if it were a signal, but no one stopped. Some even glanced at him but looked away, feigning haste. One man commented, "Someone should take care of that boy," but continued on. A woman murmured, "Poor mother," but didn't extend a hand. Nathan remained there, invisible, as if he didn't exist. Minutes seemed like hours until finally his mother came running, her eyes red with despair. She hugged him tightly, crying and apologizing, while his small body still trembled with fear. The reunion should have brought relief, but the damage was already done. The memory of the indifferent crowd was etched deeper than the embrace. And since that day, Nathan has never been able to shake the feeling that, when we need it most, the world chooses to look away. Now, decades later, sitting alone in his quarters, he understood what had really happened at the New York station. It wasn't just military instinct, it wasn't just discipline. It was the child he still carried within, reaching out to another child who cried just as he had. It was as if time had held up a mirror. In that lost girl, he saw himself again. But this time, there was an adult willing to stop. This flashback hit him hard, but not like a wound. For the first time, the memory didn't just bring pain, it brought an answer. Fate had given him the opportunity to correct, not the past, but the cycle. Where before no one had reached out, now he knelt and offered his. And in that gesture, simple and absolute, the frightened boy from the fair found solace through the adult soldier who had refused to pass by. Nathan got up, went to the window and stared out at the waking city. Below, cars hurried past, traffic lights flashed, people rushed to work. Haste remained the rule of the world, but he knew there was always a choice: stop or keep going. And this was the true battleground everyone faced without realizing it. He had won the fight that day, but the war against indifference still raged on. He took a deep breath and went back to bed. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like a prisoner of the past. When he closed his eyes, the image that came to him wasn't of the fair, but of the girl smiling weakly, hugging her backpack, grateful for being seen. And that smile was more healing than any medal he'd ever received. The next morning, the message arrived just as he was already in his boots, ready to leave. "Thank you for yesterday. You gave us more than just a way back. If I could, I wanted to thank you by looking you in the eye." There was a simple address, a discreet diner near the station. Nathan hesitated for a second. He didn't like to turn gestures into ceremonies, but went. At the Formica counter, the smell of freshly brewed coffee and toasted bread filled the air. His mother was already waiting for him, her hands folded over a paper bag. When she saw him, she stood up with a gust of relief and belated shame. "I didn't sleep well. I kept thinking about how many times I've rushed past someone who needed help." He opened the bag and took out a drawing of the girl. Two figures holding hands in the middle of a room with overhead lights, and in the background, a sign with schedules. In the corner, crooked letters formed a thank you that needed no grammar. Nathan held the paper as if receiving something alive. As they talked, the cafe functioned as a miniature world. Two station employees entered the cafe and, recognizing the mother, came to tell her that the supervisor had decided to test a marked safe spot for lost children. The older security guard had suggested something simple: stickers with the child's first name and the guardian's phone number for those disembarking during rush hour. The cashier, who had filmed the entire thing from afar the day before, confessed that she deleted the video, and instead of posting it, spent the afternoon helping a disoriented woman find the right platform. Small course corrections, born of a gesture. His mother spoke of the job she'd been unable to finish because of the shock, the late rent, the divorce that still ached like a bad, healed bone. There was no plea for pity, only truth. Nathan listened with the same attention he'd had at the station, as if each sentence were another piece of the map. He responded with few words: that we learned belatedly that stop is a verb of courage, that the city accustoms us to thinking that urgency is always ours. When she asked how long he'd be in the city, he shrugged. There were possibilities for transfer, there were exercises at another base, there was the opaque calendar imposed by the uniform. The silence that followed wasn't romantic. It was human. Neither wanted new beginnings that depended on military clocks, but they both knew that certain bonds don't require permanence to exist. At the exit, in the station corridor, they recognized a small new sign hastily printed and crookedly pasted: "If you get lost, come here. Someone will stop for you." The phrase was simple, almost childish, and yet it pierced Nathan with the force of a belated rescue. He imagined the boy he once was, standing in the middle of the market reading something like that. His mother noticed the brief shadow in his eyes and didn't ask anything. She simply touched the folded drawing he carried with her fingers and said, Some things we fix slowly. On the way back, he crossed the main hall and noticed subtle changes. A staff member directing a traveler instead of pointing with his chin. A young man bending down to tie a crying child's shoe. An announcement over the loudspeaker reminding parents to hold their little ones' hands before disembarking. None of these would stop the world from being harsh, but they were discreet counterattacks to the haste that always wins by default. His phone vibrated in his pocket. A photo. The girl at the kitchen table proudly showing off her recovered backpack. In the corner of the image, a plastic mug with her name handwritten on it. "We're fine. And you?" He replied with the same economy he uses when it matters. "Me too." At night, the dorm seemed less cramped. Nathan opened the drawer and placed the drawing next to an old yellowed note where his mother had written, "If you get lost, stop near Mr. Abel's stand," a plan that had failed on a tumultuous Saturday. They stood side by side, the instruction of the past and the test of the present. He realized with a new serenity that fate sometimes returns scenarios just to check if we've learned our lesson. Karma didn't roar, it whispered, and the whisper said there was still something to be done before the story could truly reach its final point. In the early hours of the morning, a notification broke through the darkness. The mother asking, without insistence, if he could accompany them to the station this weekend to teach the girl the right path. A safety test, a rite of passage in reverse. Nathan smiled in the darkness. It wasn't about repeating a fear, it was about teaching how to cross. He said yes. And as sleep finally arrived, he understood that the next step wasn't a grand public rescue, but a quiet gesture that closes circles, returning to the same ground, now hand in hand, and proving that indifference can, indeed, unlearn the path. Saturday dawned with a clear sky that seemed freshly washed. The station, seen from the outside, no longer held the same weight as before. It was just an iron and glass building, reflecting the light, as if demanding a second reading. Nathan arrived a few minutes early and waited outside, hands in his pockets, watching people cross the square with their usual weekend pace. When the mother and daughter appeared, the first thing he noticed was the pink backpack firmly on her small shoulders and the colorful bracelet dangling from her wrist. Discreet talismans against the rush of the world. They approached with restrained smiles, as if stepping onto territory that was once a battlefield and is now a classroom. They entered together. The marble floor echoed with steps that weren't meant to escape, but rather to practice. Nathan bent down to the girl's level and, with the patience of a craftsman, showed her the intimate geography of the place. The large clock like a lighthouse, the timetable sign like a map of the sky, the yellow signs indicating restrooms, exits, and platforms. He pointed to an information desk a few meters away and told her that was the safe spot, the harbor she should always navigate to if she ever felt lost. The child listened with the eyes of someone memorizing a secret, and her mother, behind her, memorized every gesture as if learning a prayer. Together they mapped out the route back home, not the path of the rails, but the path of certainty. Step by step, Nathan pointed out steps, handrails, places where the crowds usually close in, and stopped before the new, crookedly printed sign that read, "If you get lost, come here. Someone will stop for you." He read it aloud, slowly, so the words would carry weight. The girl repeated it, laughing at the "someone will stop," as if playing with the verb that had saved him. The mother touched the sign with her fingertips and took a deep breath, and in that simple gesture was a pact, not to let fear dictate the next chapters. A security guard approached, recognized the three, and modestly explained that the station was testing new routines. Now during peak hours, an employee circulated only to keep an eye on children and the elderly. There were identification stickers at the ticket office. The loudspeaker had added reminders to keep hands on board when disembarking. Nothing changed the world by decree, but it was enough for that corner of the city to have learned something. Nathan thanked her with the same curt nod as always, and the girl clutched her backpack like someone holding a treasure map. In the middle of the room they staged the what if, not as a scare but as a rehearsal. Nathan agreed on a code word only the three of them would know, taught the girl to adjust her tone of voice when asking for help, showed her to keep her head up and her eyes searching for uniform faces. Then he took 2 steps away, just 2, and watched her. She breathed in softly, lifted her chin, and walked alone to the counter, where she asked to test the safe spot. The clerk smiled, stamped a small piece of paper with a star design, and handed it back like someone handing out a certificate of passage. The mother clapped her hands, her eyes moist, and Nathan felt an old piece finally click into place. As they prepared to leave, the girl was the one who saw it first. A much smaller boy standing next to the column, looking around with a panic Nathan recognized from afar. This time, he didn't need to move. The little girl pulled her mother by the hand and, with newly practiced confidence, pointed to the "Someone will stop for you" sign. She led the boy to the counter, gave her name, explained that it was a port, and waited with him until her grandmother arrived with trembling hands and an embarrassed thank you. Nathan stood a few meters behind, witness to an effect that needed no explanation. The child who yesterday needed a helping hand, today was capable of being a bridge. They stepped out into the cold light of late morning. On the doorstep, his mother leaned her shoulder against Nathan's for a moment that spoke volumes. It wasn't a promise of the future, it was an acknowledgement of the present. "I think the station gave back what it took today," she whispered, and he responded with a brief smile, because he knew no more fitting word. The girl ran to the sidewalk, spinning around as if testing the new lightness of her body. When she returned, she handed him the token with the star. "It's for you, to remind you that we can do it." He tucked the paper into the inside pocket of his jacket, the same place where the things that hold life inside sleep. As they said goodbye, Nathan realized the sound of the trains didn't hurt again. It was mechanical, ordinary music, and yet, on that Saturday, it made sense. He stood there for a while, watching mother and daughter walk away across the square, and only when they disappeared into the bright daylight did he understand the exact shape of what was closing. A simple circle, drawn without fanfare, in which a boy lost in the past extended his hand, through the man he had become to a girl in the present, and by extension to all the others who would come. There was no heroism there, there was method and tenderness. And a certainty that finally didn't slip through his fingers. Some wars are won by returning to the same place, with different eyes. Sunday brought a different tide of people, carrying suitcases, and in a hurry. Nathan had arranged to meet mother and daughter just for a quick coffee, a weekend farewell without promises. The station seemed more crowded than usual. A violin trio played out of tune near the ticket office, children ran with balloons, and the departures board flashed intermittent delays. They were almost across the hall when the light wavered twice, like tired eyelids, and with a sharp crack, part of the ceiling plunged into semi-darkness. An alarm coughed hesitantly, then engaged in a continuous howl that grated on everyone's nerves. That was enough for the rumor to gain a name: fire. No one saw smoke, but fears require no proof. The wave of people moved first backward, then sideways aimlessly. Shoving, bags raised like shields, voices cut off. Nathan felt his old instincts flare up. "Breathe. Hold my voice," he said softly but firmly, pulling his body closer to the two of them as if shielding a small flame from the wind. The mother held the girl held the bracelet, and for a second they were one, until the inevitable shove separated them by a hand's breadth, which turned into a meter. The mother stumbled, nearly fell, and her hand slipped free. Panic has nimble fingers. It was the girl who remembered first, the code word whispered at Saturday's rehearsal. She said it loudly, clearly, like a password that unlocks doors. Her mother heard it even over the noise, turned left, and Nathan nodded. Safe point. The child lifted her chin the way they'd practiced, and walked against the current to the glass balcony of the port, without running, without lowering her eyes. Nathan pushed his way with his body, pushing back with firm gentleness. His mother was right behind, but a stroller stuck in the lane caused the entire row to choke. The alarm didn't help. Every second was a baited hook, pulling people in the wrong direction. In the midst of the suffocation, a thin cry cut through the air. It wasn't the girl's. A little boy, smaller than her, clutching a teddy bear by one ear, spun around trying to find someone who wasn't there. Nathan pointed with his eyes. He didn't need to speak. The girl understood. She touched the little boy's shoulder with the precise sweetness of someone learning a new map and said, "Come with me." "We have a port." She pulled him by the hand unhurriedly, and the two walked straight to the counter lit by emergency lights. The employee recognized the scene from the rehearsal, opened the small door, and safely locked them both inside. His mother arrived soon after, her heart in her eyes, and Nathan finally placed his hands on the glass, checking out the world. Outside, the rumor of fire had already turned into something else. "Short circuit in the dashboard," someone was saying. A security guard ran over with a blaring radio and asked for help opening the side doors. Nathan went. In a few gestures, he walled off the panic. He formed a human corridor, directed the flow to the flanks, stopped the escalator that was spewing people out, lifted a child onto the lap of a tall stranger, taught with his hands that a line saves more than strength. Meanwhile, behind the glass, the girl quietly repeated the breathing exercise to the little boy with the teddy bear, whose chin was trembling like a bird's wing. When the lights finally returned to full power and the alarm died with an embarrassed sigh, the station fell into cathedral-like silence for 3 seconds. Then came the usual sounds, but with a different heat. The speaker choked out a technical explanation and apologized. There was no fire, just a warning disguised as fright. People became people again. The boy's grandfather came running, eyes like coarse salt, and his thank you came out crooked, cute. The employee stamped another paper star and handed it to the girl as if proclaiming something new about the world. The mother hugged Nathan once wordlessly as if anchoring him. He responded with a forehead bump, like someone checking to see if the miracle has a fever. Nearby, 2 cleaning staff looked at each other and whispered, "That poster works." The security guard wrote in a worn notebook, "Simulate evacuation from a safe point." The cashier, who had previously filmed, now put away forgotten cell phones and patiently gave directions. They were tiny screws tightened in the right places. Only then did Nathan realize he was trembling, not from fear but from the body that after the fight gives back. He sat on the iron bench with his mother and the girl for a minute that felt like rest. He looked at the hall with the eyes of someone who had once been small inside, even though it was another city, another fair. The difference wasn't the height of the ceiling, it was the size of the hands. One was in his, small and firm. The other, his mother's, touched his shoulder in a thank you that asked for no return. The vibration in her pocket brought a message from the station's supervisor, unexpected and simple. "If you can, I'd like to talk. We're thinking of formalizing this port with you." He read it, took a breath and didn't respond. Not out of refusal, but because he understood the weight of the question. Sometimes, returning to the same place is accepting a stage you didn't ask for, to teach what haste has unlearned. The girl, unfamiliar with adult dilemmas, took the paper star from her pocket and thrust it into his hand. "Keep it, to remind us that we know the way." As they stood to leave, the departure board flashed again, the violins went out of tune again, and the city resumed its conductorless music. Outside, the afternoon wind ruffled hair and news, and Nathan felt history entering a curve that wasn't solely his to decide. Fate, patiently, positioned the pieces for one final move, the one in which the place that once swallowed him becomes, in front of everyone, proof that one stop can, indeed, change the trajectory of many. He closed his hand over the star, looked at the crooked sign, and for the first time imagined it engraved in metal. The rest would come with the next step. The supervisor received him in a narrow room with a window overlooking the tracks, the metallic screech of the brakes cutting sentences to shreds. There was no ceremony, just a table littered with glasses and a notebook open with hurried ideas. "What you did opened a door," the man said, twirling a pen between his fingers. "We want to formalize. A truly secure location with trained personnel, a sign that can be read from afar, a simple protocol. And, if you're up for it, we'd like you to help design it." Nathan listened without rushing. The invitation was clear, but it carried shadows he knew. Spotlights, interviews, the symbolic role that always takes its toll. For an instant, he saw himself back on the day of the medal he never asked for, the stage that weighs more than it saves. The supervisor, sensing his hesitation, lowered his tone. "It's not about heroism, it's about method. You've seen what works." They walked around the room as they spoke, as if measuring with their feet what they wanted to change. Nathan pointed out bottlenecks with his closed hand, suggested low traffic lights at child height, a counter visible from 3 angles, tape on the floor to guide without shouting. He spoke of code words, clear announcements, training eyes to look not just for abandoned bags but for loose hands. The supervisor wrote everything down, sincere in his ignorance and desire. "We can start small and right," he concluded. "I'll pilot it in 2 weekends. If it works, we'll make it a rule." That afternoon, the mother appeared with the girl, discreet as always, and found Nathan leaning against a column, his sleeves rolled up, indicating where the sign should go. The child ran to him and asked if the port would have a bell. "There'll be something better," he replied, pointing to a square of light the technician was testing overhead. "There'll be a lighthouse." The mother heard from afar and smiled, a brief smile of someone who recognizes the exact word for their own nights. There was a naturalness about them that required no explanation. They talked like people who had crossed the same bridge and were now planning how to keep it firm for the next ones. As the tests were underway, the station revealed small changes. The security guard I'd previously only observed now descended 2 steps to guide elderly people. The cashier placed a pad of identification stickers in plain sight. A new announcement asked adults to lower themselves to the level of children upon disembarking. These were gestures that don't appear in reports, but they changed the atmosphere of the place. And without announcement, the news spread through the corridors. The following Saturday afternoon, they would launch the Safe Point. Nothing grand. A ribbon, a brief applause, a thank you. They wanted Nathan to say 2 sentences. He didn't promise. He just said he'd be there. That night, in the dorm, the invitation weighed on the table like cold metal. Between stage fright and the refusal to back down, there was a narrow path that led him to the boy he had once been. He sat down, opened the drawer, and took out his mother's yellowed note, the one, "If you get lost, stop near Mr. Abel's stall," that had slipped through one morning. He placed beside it the stamped star the girl had given him, 2 eras of the same warning, 2 maps for the same crossing. The question that remained was not, "What if they look at me?" but "What if I don't look at them?" The answer came in the form of a simple message to the supervisor. "I'll be there at 2. Bring whoever needs to learn." On Saturday, the station seemed to recognize its own face. The crooked sign gave way to a clear sign with large letters and a drawing of an outstretched hand. There was a low handrail near the counter, and a yellow stripe painted on the floor formed a path any child would follow without thinking. The mother had arrived with her daughter minutes earlier, carrying a jar of cookies in a bag and the shyness of someone unsure of where to put their hands on important days. Nathan adjusted the sign with the technician, tested the headlight, and listened to the speaker adjustment on the radio. Everything worked, and yet something inside him trembled, not with the fear of error, but with the seriousness of success. When the supervisor called him for a few sentences, Nathan didn't climb on anything. He remained level with those passing by, his voice effortlessly firm. He said that the safe spot wasn't a monument, it was a commitment, that stopping is a verb conjugated with the eyes before the mouth, that lighthouse would only truly light if everyone learned to be a harbor for someone. There was no long applause, no speeches. There were heads that nodded as if receiving flight instruction. Beside him, the girl held his hand and whispered that now she knew how to get to the light on her own. His mother, with both hands on the pot, looked at the tracks as if finally recognizing solid ground. At the end of the day, when the ribbons were collected and the sign stood alone in its new position, Nathan walked to the exit with the 2 of them. The afternoon wind stirred the paper star in his pocket. He clearly understood the outline of the cycle that was closing, a man who learned not to ask for a stage, accepting for once to be visible so that others might learn the way. And yet, he felt a small gesture was missing, one that would cement the lesson instead of the shock. The supervisor had promised to send the first pilot issues, the first stories of the lighthouse working during the week. The town seemed to hold its breath for a moment. On the stairs, the girl stopped to tie her shoelace. Nathan crouched down, patiently tied the knot, and noticed beneath the noise of the station restarting a stillness that only appears before the curve. There was no bad omen. There was certain expectation. Karma, as discreet as it was decisive, whispered again that important stories always require one last step to become reality. He descended the last step with this certainty in his bones. The next page would depend not on medals or headlines, but on a new, real test in which the beacon would need to shine not on metal, but on the chest of those who had learned to see. The following Wednesday, the station was experiencing one of its heaviest late afternoons. A series of train delays left the platforms crowded, suitcases piling up, and passengers' irritation spilled over into harsh murmurs. The departures board flashed with cancellations, and the tinny voice of the announcements seemed incapable of containing the collective frustration. The newly installed secure stop sign shone in the background, illuminated, but for many, it was still just an invisible detail in the rush. Nathan, who had been following the testing routine from a distance, decided to pass by almost unnoticed, just to observe. It was then that Karma, faithful in its precision, decided to rear its ugly head. A distracted woman, carrying 2 suitcases and talking on the phone, didn't notice her 5-year-old son slipping from her grasp and standing in front of the oncoming stream of people. The confused boy looked around, and within seconds, his face transformed into panic. He tried to call out to his mother, but his voice was drowned out by the roar of the tracks. He remained there, too small, trapped between suitcases and indifferent shoulders. Nathan's heart raced. It was the same scene again, a cruel mirror of his childhood and what he'd seen days before. Time seemed to shrink. He moved instinctively, pushing his way through the crowd, but something unexpected happened before he reached it. The girl, the one now wearing the colorful bracelet on her wrist, saw him first. She was there with her mother, holding hands, but she recognized the boy's lost look. She didn't wait for a command. She dropped her backpack, ran to him, and said firmly, "Come with me." "You're not alone." Nathan stopped a few feet away, and what he saw struck him like a revelation. The child he had saved days before was now repeating the gesture he had received. He took the boy by the hand and led him to the yellow stripe painted on the ground, pointing to the newly installed lighthouse. The boy obeyed, his eyes still teary, but his steps less shaky. Nathan and his mother followed close behind, shielding them from the crowd's jostling. When they reached the safe harbor counter, the trained employee opened the hatch and welcomed the 2 little ones. Nathan crouched down before them, looked at the girl, and realized what fate had handed him. The cycle closed, proof that the simple gesture of stopping had taken root. It was no longer he who extended his hand. It was she. The child who had once been saved was now a bridge to another. The new boy's mother arrived in despair, her eyes wide, clutching him like someone catching their breath after a long swim. She cried and apologized repeatedly, staring at Nathan and the girl as if she were staring at something she couldn't name. The entire room seemed more attentive. People who had previously ignored it now pointed to the sign, commenting on its operation, realizing that the lighthouse wasn't just for show, it was useful. It was real. Nathan, for his part, felt a different lump in his throat. It wasn't pain, it wasn't just relief. It was the realization that Karma hadn't come to punish, but to teach. That safe haven no longer existed just in the station's glass window, but in the heart of a child who had quickly learned not to be indifferent, and in the reflection of that gesture, he saw the small version of himself, lost at the fair so many years ago, finally being welcomed by someone. The supervisor approached, eyes welling up, and murmured, "Now I understand. It's not about what you did. It's about what starts to happen next." Nathan nodded, no words needed. He knew the real beacon was lit. As he left that night, crossing the square, the cold wind blew against Nathan's face, but the feeling of emptiness was gone. He touched the inside pocket of his jacket, where he kept the paper star, and smiled. The next step was inevitable. Life would force him to face once and for all the past that still lingered on the invisible cross of his memory. But now, he wasn't walking alone. On Thursday, the city seemed to have washed its face after the hustle and bustle. Nathan arrived early at his lodging, opened the drawer, and spread out on the table the 2 relics that had been guiding his steps: his mother's yellowed note with the instructions he'd failed at a distant fair, and the small stamped star the girl had given him during their rehearsal crossing. They stood side by side, like 2 banks finally speaking. The phone vibrated with a short message from the supervisor. The first reports from the lighthouse began to arrive: a grandmother who found her grandson without a fuss, a teenager who brought a child to the counter in silence, a couple who said they finally understood why getting down to eye level changes everything. They weren't numbers, they were stories. Nathan responded with a thank you that meant more. Then he took a deep breath and dialed a number that had been stuck in his throat for years. His mother's voice answered with the same softness he remembered, a worn cotton that resists time. They talked about trivial matters first, like someone taking the temperature before stepping into cold water. Then he told her about the station, the crooked sign that became a sign, the lit lighthouse, the girl who learned to be a bridge. On the other side, a full silence. His mother took a deep breath and apologized for a time they'd never had, as if the guilt still lingered on the Saturday the market swallowed her son for endless minutes. Nathan smiled without her seeing and said there was no debt to pay. There was a lesson to be learned. "Mom, yesterday I felt small again, but it didn't hurt. It hurt less because I stopped for someone, and someone learned to stop too." The sound of dishes resting on the sink betrayed her trembling hands. "So it's fixed?" He didn't promise a miracle, he promised continuity. "It's being fixed." In the afternoon, he walked to the place where the city holds its own version of a market. Not the same, but a different one, with the scent of new fruit, flowers lined up, and voices announcing freshness. He stopped at the entrance, let his body remember without hurting itself, and searched for some trace of the boy who cried there decades before. There was no Mr. Abel's stall, no shadow of acquaintances. There was, however, the white light of the end of the day, piercing through tents and creating corridors of brightness. He understood that he didn't need the setting to close the chapter. The decision was enough. He bought a star-shaped keychain from a knick-knack stall, small and unremarkable, and clasped it in his hand as if sealing a deal. The next day he returned to the station to see firsthand how the lighthouse breathed on ordinary days. The sign now seemed less new because it had become part of everyday life. It was part of the air. The mother and the girl arrived shortly after, bringing 2 cups of hot chocolate and the old drawing carefully folded. The girl asked to test the port again, more out of fun than fear, and the employee smiled with the intimacy of someone who already recognizes names. The supervisor appeared with papers and an enthusiasm he tried to disguise. He spoke of expanding the pilot to other stations in a simple manual with large print and human examples, and asked bluntly if Nathan would be willing to record a short video explaining the lighthouse's logic. He nodded slowly, pierced by a doubt that wasn't a refusal, but rather a caution. Visibility helps, but it also steals silence. He promised to think. He promised something even greater, to stay close by while people learn to combine stop in the present. As the 3 of them sat on the iron bench, the girl rested her head on his arm, a spontaneous gesture that dispelled any ceremony. She talked about school lessons, homework, and her desire to have a real star attached to the sign for when the power goes out. Nathan looked at his inside jacket pocket, felt the light weight of the keychain he'd bought at the market, and knew the suggestion had come from fate. "We can hide one here," he said, pointing to the back of the stand. "Not for decoration, as a reminder." The girl cheered, her mother nodded, and there came the drawing of the missing gesture. Early in the evening, when the hall emptied and the rushing around turned to spaced footsteps, Nathan asked the supervisor for permission to do something. He climbed a small ladder, opened the blind panel behind the sign, and, with the delicacy of rites that require no audience, placed the yellowed ticket and the metal star inside. He didn't close it immediately. Instead, he wanted to touch with his fingertips the paper that had once tried to guide him without success. "If you get lost, stop near Mr. Abel's stand." A brief smile. There was no stand. There was a lighthouse, and there was a working port. He fitted the panel, tightened the screws, and climbed down. You didn't tell anyone. The secret was as good as the things that hold the soul. As they left, the mother thanked them again, but the words sounded different. It wasn't just gratitude for a past rescue. It was gratitude for a future that was already beginning to exist. The girl ran to the lighthouse, touched its base as if checking if the object's heart was beating, and returned with the lightness of someone who has overcome a fear and learned the way back. Nathan accompanied them to the door, and the cold night wind brought with it the certainty that the story had one more turn to take. The supervisor had promised to gather by Saturday reports on the port's first complete cycle: who arrived, who helped, what was missing. The invitation to the video returned by message, this time accompanied by a photo, the sign seen from afar, with two little ones holding hands, pointing to the light. Lying in bed later, he considered what to say if he agreed to speak. Not about himself, never, about method, yes, about eyes that learn to stop, about hands that offer themselves, about the humble miracle of repetitions that save. Karma, he finally realized, is in no hurry. It prowls until someone learns the right choreography. And Nathan, with heavy eyelids, understood that he was one step away from the gesture that ties all the loose ends, making public, with precise measure, what began on the cold floor of the station and now beat with the rhythm of a discreet lighthouse. Dawn crept in through the window, and sleep arrived with a phrase ready for the next day, simple as everything worthwhile. If you get lost, we'll stop. On Saturday, the station felt different. There was no music from out-of-tune violins, no cries of delay. There was an attentive silence, as if even the tracks knew something new was being born there. The supervisor, the security team, and a few employees gathered in front of the lighthouse. It was no official ceremony. There were no TV cameras, just a simple tape and a small group of people who had witnessed the previous days. The mother and the girl stood there, holding hands, and Nathan, standing a few feet away, watched in silence. He didn't feel like a hero, just part of a cycle that was now complete. The supervisor opened the tape with cheap scissors and announced the official operation of the safe point. The sign shone under the overhead light, but what really lit up the girl's eyes? She ran to the base of the lighthouse, touched the metal surface, and smiled. "Now no one will get lost alone," she said with the innocence of someone who understands before adults. The mother, with discreet tears, looked at Nathan and nodded, as if in that moment recognizing that fate sometimes gives back what it once took away. But what no one knew was that behind that plaque lay a secret. Nathan's yellowed childhood note and the small metal star slept there, like two hearts beating silently. It was the past and the present meeting in the same space, stitched together by the simple gesture of stopping in front of someone. The boy who had cried invisibly at the fair finally found a place. Not by a miracle, but because a grown man decided not to repeat the indifference that had hurt him. At the end, some employees asked Nathan to say a few words. He took a deep breath, remembered the sleepless nights, the memories that haunted him, and spoke calmly. The safe haven isn't the sign. It's not the lighthouse. It's each of us. It's when someone decides to stop, even if they're late, even if the world demands haste. If you remember this light will never go out. There was no euphoric applause, just a reverent silence, followed by discreet nods. It was more than enough. When he said goodbye to the mother and daughter, Nathan didn't promise future reunions, but the girl placed another stamped star, now colored, made at school, in his hands. "So you never forget to stop." He tucked it into the same inside pocket of his jacket, where its light weight seemed larger than any medal. His mother thanked him again, but this time not as someone repaying a debt, as someone sharing a future. Hours later, alone, Nathan returned to his dorm. He sat on his bed and took a deep breath. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the knot in my stomach thinking about the boy he'd been. Karma no longer haunted him. It had become a bridge, a beacon. He smiled as he realized that, deep down, he had saved not just a lost child, but himself as well. And that was the greatest rescue of all. On his way out the next day, he crossed the station again. The sign was there, firm, illuminated, and two curious children pointed at it while their parents explained its meaning. Nathan didn't need to stop. There were already other attentive eyes, other outstretched hands. He simply followed, knowing the cycle was complete. If this story touched you, leave a like and subscribe to the channel, comment below. Have you ever experienced a moment when someone stopped for you, or you stopped for someone? Your answer may inspire many people to look beyond the rush. And don't leave. The next video is on the way, bringing another story of courage, emotion, and change that will touch your heart.